we'll introduce Don Borden, who comes to us from Philadelphia. And Don has been an active member of the Santa Fe Modeler Society since at least 1981. So you're hearing from a real Santa Fe expert here.
Just to give you a little background, for some reason, living on the East Coast, growing up in New Jersey, living in Pennsylvania, I was just attracted to the Santa Fe, just everything about it. You'll see a little bit later, my modeling period is late 40s, early 50s. I started out as a modeler with primary interest in steam locomotives and super detailing, brass, and that kind of thing. Then I had the opportunity to build a layout, and then doing a lot of studying, a lot of reading. I sort of determined what I wanted to do from a goal standpoint. But what I've come to find out is that I was also very interested in operations. And the more I got interested in operations, the more I realized that my railroad and the setup from an operator standpoint was not working. I'm also a member of a local group called the TNRR. We meet every Tuesday night. We've got about 24, 25 people in the group. Most of them are pretty serious modelers. We have a rotation where we have it set that we go to different railroads every Tuesday night. So this is just a brief summary of what I was trying to do. Geographically correct, operationally correct, including all aspects of train, passenger, and freight operations over Cajon Pass, modeling specific areas of the railroad. But I also wanted it visually correct and audibly correct so that the sounds that you were hearing from the locomotives were prototype. For example, Cajon Pass is 3% grade. Steam engines climbing the hill were very loud. I fussed around a lot with different types of sound decoders. Train control systems is about 10 minutes from my house. I started working with them and talking to them about the need to have an engine drift downhill with very little sound, increase sound and intensity as they climbed. And they were able to develop a decoder that does that. This is a quick summary of the principles involved in the railroad, what I was trying to achieve. Those of you familiar with Cajon Pass will probably know a lot of this stuff. There was a fellow in the Santa Fe Historical Society who did a PowerPoint presentation that he presented at one of our East Coast Santa Fe modelers meet, where he did 24 hours of trains over Cajon Pass. And in 1945, in one 24-hour period, there were 234 major train movements recorded at Summit. And if you go back into that and look at it from an hour or a minute standpoint, you get an appreciation of how much traffic was moving over the hill. About all of this traffic on these steep grades with speeds of 10 miles an hour at full throttle. And a lot of them went slower than that. And if you can just imagine standing on the right-of-way with two heavy 3800 class 210-2s, one a helper and one a road engine, climbing that grade at 5 miles an hour under full throttle. You can imagine what it sounded like and what it felt like. That's sort of the operational goal that I was going to. This is a brief overview of what Cajon Pass looks like. It was out of Jared Walker's book. As we go through the presentation, there'll be a repeat of these slides that highlights the area that's being presented in the PowerPoint. This is the straight line diagram of my railroad. There is an approach yard interlocking, which leads to two staging yards. There's an east and west of Los Angeles and an east and west of Victorville. Both of these staging yards contain a total of 16 tracks. This is a brief summary of what the staging yards look like. These yards are not very full right now. There's a lot of trains that are out on the railroad. But there's a Los Angeles east and west, and you can see that they're stacked on top of each other. And there is a Victorville east and west. The Victorville east staging is a little unusual because it lies underneath San Bernardino. And trying to get that built below an already existing part of the railroad was a real challenge. The curved sections of plywood had to be worked in from the end and worked around the curve to be put in place. The panel you see in the upper right, on the past year and a half, we went on an electronics kick based on need from operations. We put in an electronic control system that routes trains into and out of staging. Operationally, what happens is that when an operator arrives at the approach yard interlock, he radios the dispatcher, tells him what train he has. The dispatcher checks the record, determines where that train has to go, then throws the turnouts to go through the interlocking and into the correct approach yard. In the approach yard, there's an approach yard staging manager who then routes the train into one of the staging areas and also controls the outgoing. You can see the signals and the LEDs on the panel illuminated for managing that. All right, the first area we're going to look at is San Bernardino. This is basically the west side of San Bernardino. You can see the A yard in front of you, the freight yard, the small freight yard and the freight station, and the beginning of the depot behind it. Lower left, the San Bernardino local with M181 with the gull wing paint scheme on it. On the lower right, you're looking across the A yard to the front of the depot. This depot is cut down. It was made by Red River Models. It was strategically shortened to fit into the space. The depot built a full-scale model on a friend's layout down in Maryland. That full-scale model is 8.5 feet long, and it is just an enormous, enormous structure. So this is a cut-down version of it. Looking across, you can see the rear of the 35-stall roundhouse for the servicing facility, which we'll look at a little bit later. Lower left, you can see business car 405 sitting on the business car siding on the east end of the depot. On the upper right, there's a real quick photograph. I put that in there of a manufacturer that I found in China that makes a very, very close model of the floodlights that were situated between the platforms. A couple of quick shots of the servicing facility. This is one of the areas of the layout that I want to do, but I just haven't gotten to it yet. A friend of mine down in Maryland, Mike Davis, I mentioned before, he worked up some castings and we built prototype, the San Bernardino roundhouse. He built a shortened version. I built the full 35 stalls. You can see the beginning of the windows that I had made, 3D printed wooden windows. The lower right is where the sand house will be. Caswells are sitting there with the sand load inside them. And on the upper right, you can see just the beginning of the entrance to the facilities with a set of FTs and a set of F3s waiting on the ready trucks. Now, if we move to the east end of San Bernardino, you have the point where it moves out of San Bernardino past the 5th Street Tower, moves in easterly direction. So these are just a couple of different shots. You can see the helpers sitting in the background. Those are the engine cards for the helpers that we use in the opposition. This 5th Street Tower is by prototype. We found a manufacturer down in Florida who does specific custom buildings. The bridge was built by another modeler, but that 5th Street Tower model was built by this firm in Florida. Just an absolutely magnificent job. The first train order station is going to be DeVore. These are some photographs of DeVore. We have the east end, left hand running with the sand for traction on the eastbound main. You have another picture of the eastbound main from the other direction that shows the cantilever signal bridge and the pot signals and the white marks on the ties for the stopping locations. In the middle is actually it's a foam core mock-up of the DeVore depot. When I found the plans and I put them into AutoCAD, traced the plans out, printed them out and put them on foam core, cut it out, put the foam core model together and then painted it with magic markers. The two inserts for the cantilever signal bridge and the eastbound pot signals, as well as the DeVore sign and the track diagram at the top, they're around the layout in front of each one of the train order depots. Gives you the milepost and it gives you the direction. San Bernardino was to the west and Keenbrook goes to the right. The bridge on the lower right was scratch built based on the plans. It was a real interesting effort because it's well over 3 feet long. I built it all out of wood to begin with. But then I started getting real concerned about expansion and contraction down in the basement environment. So what I did is that I got 3/4 inch aluminum angle and reinforce the internal area of the bridge. And it's been sitting there for 3 years and it hasn't moved an inch. All the track's in full alignment. The next train order station is Cambrick. Now, the rest of these train order stations, with the exception of Cajon, are still in a raw, unscenic area. You can see that I started to put the foam scenery into Cambrick, but I haven't gotten too far with that. We have the lower Cambrick up in the upper left-hand corner, which has the siding for the water tank and the water column, which is not in place for watering rear end helpers. And the lower right, we have upper Cambrick, where there was another water treatment plant and 2 water tanks. There was a depot there, but in my period, it's gone. But then there's a little manager's shack across the track from that. In Cajon Pass and all these train order depots, they typically have the 2 mains, the westbound main, which was on the left, and the eastbound main. Almost every one of these had passing sidings on both sides. They also had crossovers on both ends, so that if you had a westbound train that was going back to San Bernardino, and for some reason that track was blocked for whatever reason, had a crossover. You could cross over to the eastbound main, you could cross over to the eastbound passing siding and continue to move traffic through this area. Next area is Cajon. This area has been partially scenic. It's one of the areas that you see as you walk through the door coming into the train room. Some of you might know the name Ralph Marcus, famous Santa Fe modeler from the San Francisco area. When he passed away, I was fortunate enough to inherit all of the structures from his layout, which was not only historically correct, but personally a goal of mine. So we have Upper Cajon and we have Lower Cajon. There was a well that fed the water system. Coming out of Cajon and continuing to head east, we have twin bridges that cross the Cajon Creek. On the eastbound main, we have an area some of you might know as Sullivan's Curve, beginning of the Sullivan's Curve rock structure on the eastbound main. Next station is Alray. Again, we're heading towards Summit. Alray was very interesting. Lower Alray was just tracks, and they were separated because coming out of Cajon, the westbound main was steeper because it was downhill. The eastbound main was longer. There was a passing siding put on it. It was longer because the grade was reduced significantly for trains climbing up the Summit. On the lower side of Alray, there were 2 bridges that crossed Route 66. One bridge is in place. The pictures on the left are photographs of the actual bridges that were there, and those bridges are custom built to match the photographs. One other interesting thing about this, on the photograph to the left, which says Big Cut, Not Built, near Gish, the track on the left was a siding set out for cars that were bad order cars on a train. They would stop, take the cars out. It was a downhill grade, so they could do that. And after doing some research and talking to old Santa Fe workers, I found that was the original line of the main. When they retracted through this area, they moved the main, in this particular case to the right, left that track in place, and it was used as a set out siding for bad order cars. Okay, now we're coming up to Summit. Summit is going to be one of the featured areas on the layout. This picture on the right, to the right-hand side in the center, and gives you a sense of what the trackage through Summit looked like. There were multiple crossovers. There was an eastbound main, a westbound main, an eastbound passing siding, a westbound passing siding. There was a stock track. There was a stock loading area down in there between the Y. And there was the turning Y to turn helpers coming up from Victorville and coming up from Los Angeles. They would turn on the Y and head back. And they would either go back to Victorville or they'd go back to San Bernardino for reassignment. There's a helper that's sitting on the track, 3800 class 2102, that's sitting on the track. This is an area that's going to be modeled. Unfortunately, it's one of the highest areas of the railroad, as you can imagine, because it's the top. Somewhat difficult to get to, a future area that really is going to become a focal point on the layout. After leaving Summit, we're coming down grade again, and the next train order stop is Hesperia. Hesperia is another area where we have 2 main lines, an east and a west, and passing sidings. And there's another set-out track for bad order cars. To the left of the lower photograph, up against the siding, there's going to be a flat to the old Hesperia Hotel, which was pretty much abandoned by the time this layout was built for my operating period. So after we pass Hesperia, we're heading back to Victorville. So we're coming downgrade. All the diesel engines would be having their dynamic brakes on. All of the steam engines would be drifting. They wouldn't be making much of a chuff at all. A lot of steam hissing sounds, but very little chuff. So when they come down grade, they come to the entrance to the staging yards. This is the approach yard interlock. The interlock switches trains between the LA and the Victorville staging yards. On the railroad, we have eastbound only trains like the GFX, the Fruit Express. When that's staged, it's staged out of Los Angeles to go east to Victorville. Well, when it gets through Hesperia and is coming down through the helix, it has to be switched back to return to Los Angeles to be restaged. And that all happens in this location. Coming down from Hesperia, there's a 5-level helix with a grade of around 2%, double tracked for uphill and downhill movements. The inner radius is about 30 inches. The outer radius is about 32 inches. And the upper left-hand photograph, you can see the approach to the staging yards. The signals that you see in red are the control signals for the staging yard manager to permit trains to come in and staging. If they're ready, he throws the switches and these signals turn green. Okay, so after we go through that, we're back into staging, which is a photograph that you've seen before. Again, that comes into, in each staging yard, there's a return loop. So they're double-ended staging yards. If you look at the Victorville West staging, where 3 war bonnets are sitting, the track all the way to the left is the incoming track. That wraps around all the way to the back. It wraps around the Los Angeles West staging and comes around and then enters either the west staging or the east staging, depending on where the staging manager wants to put the trains. I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. The one thing that I have learned in doing the research and the development, particularly for operations on this railroad, is the fact that you never have enough information, and most of the information you have may not be correct. Through 25 years of building a railroad, I have learned not to sit still, to keep looking at books, to keep researching photographs, to keep talking to the experts. Some of you may know a railroader by the name of Don Sheets. Don Sheets was a conductor on the Santa Fe and San Bernardino. And I've been talking to him recently and found out that most of the westbound trains came through the passenger tracks at San Bernardino, primarily on track 1. But when they put the mail shed up during World War II, they went through on track 2. The eastbound trains came through on track 3 and 4, the eastbound main and the eastbound passing siding. Most of the eastbound Santa Fe freights went into the A yard, which I'm modeling, but some of them that were bringing in fruit loads, strawberries, oranges, whatever it might be, perishables, they would take those trains right through to the B yard where the icing platforms were and re-ice them and put them out for assembly into new trains like the GFX that's going east. The grayed out section in the middle is a spreadsheet that I had done and worked with John Thompson and the East Coast Santa Fe modelers, with a Cajon group, I could say, and documented all of the major freight trains that went through San Bernardino by type and direction, what kind of motor power they had, whether they were one-way eastbound trains or whether they were both east and west, and very much going into the details of what kind of cars that were in those trains and what kind of loads they carried. That took a lot of time to develop, but it's an invaluable tool in trying to assemble a freight train with the right set of cars that would be carrying the right loads. Automobile parts going to the West Coast. Trains would be full of automobile cars. Below that gray sheet is the train order card boxes for each one of the staging yards. And you can see the cards that are sitting there. On the lower right, you'll see the train order card with locomotive cards. One is the helper, one is the main line card. And you'll see that video at the end. And then in the lower left is the schedule. This schedule is made up of the trains, and there's some 32 trains that operate on this railroad. And this is a sequence schedule of the order that they appeared in San Bernardino on the train sheets. One other point on this, in the upper right, you can see an enlargement of the train order card. The areas that are in red were the OSing back to the dispatcher to tell the dispatcher where you were and what you were doing. In some cases, they had to OS the Summit Yard operator to tell them what train was coming into Summit, so the Summit Yard operator could assign a track for that train to come in, unhook its helpers, turn up its retainers, and start downhill to Victorville. A new aspect of the layout that we're working on is the signaling, both the pot signals, the heading out pot signals at the sidings, as well as mainline signals. The card to the left of the train order signal shows what the different signal aspects were, what the signal heads would look like, what the color aspects would be for each aspect. That is going to be attached to the back of each one of the train order cards for the operators for a quick reference. There's so much more I could tell you about this, but I don't want to drag it out too far. The two photographs on this conclusion are examples of that heavy steam period where these trains are really struggling with heavy work. Part of this is depicting some of these movements. This is a 3800 class Challenger that's drifting downhill, coming across the Cajon Bridge, the DeVore Bridge. The sound on my railroad is very, very aspect of it, along with the accuracy of the models, the numbers, the detailing, time period, and so forth. This also gives you a good idea of what the scenery is going to look like throughout the road. You can see on the fascia there, you see the information signs that are on the railroad. This westbound helper is just coming back from Summit, coming back to San Bernardino to be used for. The next video is the same swig train, but this has a steam helper, a brace of 4 F7 units. Again, we're climbing around the boards I haven't done much with weathering cars. That's some sort of future operation, but the cars are all accurate for the train that they're in. This last short video is of that same brace of F7s coming downhill through the dynamic bridge. Well, that sums up my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Don, this is John Thompson. Hey, that was amazing presentation. I wonder how many guys you have over regularly to help build this huge layout.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm good.
Good to see you. John, you might have missed the early part of it. I belong to a Tuesday night group, and we've got about 24 people in that group. And from time to time, we have work crews get together to do certain aspects of it. I have one particular friend in Doylestown that I use a lot. I work on his railroad, he works on mine. But that's about 25 years worth of work. So it's getting there, John.
Yeah.
I had a question for both you and Bill Messacar. Is the A yard with the icing, is that what's on Bill Messacar's layout in San Bernardino?
Burr, let me answer that, and Don can add something. The B yard is on my layout. The A yard is what Don said he modeled. So I didn't see any evidence of icing there, Don. I don't think you have that, do you?
If you remember, Bill, we talked about this before. You kindly sent me pictures of what you have built. The area to the west of San Bernardino, there is a short area in there where I'm going to modify the layout and expand it and put in a shortened version of the ice plant, similar to what Mike Davis built, and the icing platforms. So one of the future operations of trains is going to be a westbound freight coming into the A yard, having a switcher, a local switcher, disassemble it, put all of the reefers in a train, and then take them over and sit them on the cleaning trucks over at the small scaled down ice plant. So
Okay.
that's a future build that I have in mind.
Okay. Yeah. So Burr, for maybe for everybody else, the big west of San Bernardino, which is west of what Don has modeled on the first district, the Santa Fe has two other districts. One goes along the mountains there through Pasadena. That's called the second district. And there was a little freight operation. But anyway, the third district, which is what I model, kind of begins at the B yard and goes a longer but lower grade route through Riverside, Fullerton, and so on into Los Angeles as well. But that was the primary freight route with a couple of passenger trains. That's the area I've modeled, and that's the area where most of the fruit came out of Southern California, going eastbound, which is
Right.
over Don's layout.
Yeah, it might be
Right.
helpful to add to this discussion is that the Santa Fe, the Union Pacific had trackage rights over Cajon Pass from the Santa Fe. And the UP trains would come out from the Los Angeles area through Riverside and had their main lines come through the B yard. And Bill, I can't remember exactly where they were, but they came
Well,
through.
they joined the Santa Fe just at the north end of Riverside and went, of course, just beyond Barstow.
Yeah. And they're the ones that you see photographs of with the UP passenger trains and UP freight trains coming through the depot tracks for the Fifth Street Tower area and heading up to Cajon. It was an interesting choice that I had that I decided not to do. I had modeled some of the Southern Pacific trains that were rerouted through San Bernardino when the SP had washouts. But when I came down to it, there was enough research involved in UP and Santa Fe, and I eventually decided not to do the Southern Pacific.
Yeah. I had another question, Don. How do your crews communicate with your dispatcher?
We use radios, walkie-talkies. We tried it without it, and there's just too much noise in the room, and you really can't enjoy the trains.
And how large is the room?
About 25 by 22. When we do operations, we have 6 operating positions: tower operators, yard operators, and dispatcher. We had an operating session, I guess maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. And for the first time, we had 13 trains running on the layout at one time.
Wow.
And they were all long trains, both passenger and freight. And it was the first time that I was able to see what my long-term goal was, to see the kind of traffic that this area saw, and the same, sounds and operating characteristics. There's requirements for my operators to use the bells and whistles and horns where they're supposed to. They don't always do it, but hopefully we're building for that direction.
So is virtually everything done sound equipped, all of your motive power?
Yes,
Okay, yeah.
yes.
That's
Every,
what you
every one
told
of them, every one of them is sound equipped, and unfortunately, I have this habit of every time my best friend says, "I've never seen a locomotive that I didn't want to have."
me.
So when the BLI 282s come out, I bought 5 of them.
Of course.
So I mean that's when you look at Bill, when you look at the San Bernardino Roundhouse,
Yeah,
when it was full,
yeah,
all 35 stalls had locomotives in them, and there were still another 15 or more on the inbound and the outbound tracks.
right.
And I envision that goal of having that roundhouse not full, but pretty much full, and having all those steam engines live, and hearing all those steam sounds coming from the engine terminal.
Wow.
Well, everybody can dream, Bill.
Yeah.
As a footnote, Bill Messicar is modeling just west of Don's area, and I'm starting to build a basement size layout just of Victorville, which is at the east end of Don Borden's area.
Are you saying your layout goes north from there, from Victorville?
It's just Victorville.
Oh, okay.
The whole layout is just Victorville plus
All right.
staging.
Yeah, I don't know if John Harrison is still on the line, but John has been out here for our East Coast Santa Fe Modelers meeting. I keep trying to get John Thompson to come out, but so far he's refused. John Harrison has come out, and we have talked. Mike Davis is modeling the same area, so John and Mike and I have conversed a lot about the areas and modeling and techniques and sharing information and that kind of thing. So
Yes,
Yeah,
Don, I'm
we
here.
have a whole online discussion group of Cajon with about 500 members. So that goes on every day.
yeah, we just had, well, I haven't completed yet, but we've been talking about this aspect of train operation into San Bernardino, and which tracks they use, what the signals look like. I come to find out somewhere out east of San Bernardino at Ono, there were megaphones mounted to the poles with an electronic circuit that turned them on, where the arriving trains could use whistle signals to indicate whether they had to go into the A yard or whether they were going through the depot tracks. So it's all of these interesting tidbits of information that make it fun and exciting to model this area.
Well, Don, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. John Harrison, hopefully sometime in the future, I can persuade you to show your wonderful work at Summit, which is what he's modeled basically just from Alray to what, the East End? Have you done the Frost flyover, John Harrison?
No,
Okay.
no, pretty much ends on the east end at the end of the long sidings east of Summit.
So
And
I think John is
John's
modeling it about 80% of actual size. Does that sound right, John?
Summit is exactly scaled 75% based on the minimum radius, and it's an 80-inch full scale is modeled as 60-inch radius, minimum radius on my layout. It's Summit. Alray and Gish are a little bit more compressed because that's a huge area down there. Alray and Gish would take up my whole basement if I modeled And that's 100 feet long. If-
John Harrison's model of Summit is just amazing.
Yes,
And
indeed.
I would like to see him do a presentation here as well.
John, did you say your basement is 100 feet long?
Yeah, but that does not, the whole railroad doesn't go. I have awful lot of others. I have a huge shop, which takes almost as much space as the railroad. So
Did you design the home? Did you have it built, or did you
Yes.
find a house someplace that has a 100-foot long basement?
we drove one realtor close to insanity when I said I do a shop. And she showed me something that had a corner of a garage. And I said, no, has to be a minimum of 2,000 square feet. And I ended up with 2,800. So no, we designed it in 2000 and built in 2004 and 2005.
Well, we'd be happy to host a layout tour of your progress so far, if you'd like to do that in the future.
That's definitely on my list. My problem is that I'm so involved in scenery already that I don't want to stop. Plaster has a way of going bad and so forth. So I think
Yeah.
I'm within probably a month of being able to do that.
John, if you want to share expenses, Mike and I'll come out and visit and help you.
I'm going to go ahead and say thank you very much. That was an excellent tour. Thanks a
go-
lot, Don.
It's good to see you all.
Thank
Take care.
you.
February 12th, Saturday, February 12th, in the same time. And if any of you would like to give a layout tour, be sure to get in touch with us. And we'll see you in a month, if not sooner.
Thanks.